got some good news for your ears. More of that good stuff is coming up. And even better news for your hair. The best hair care is at Sephora. They've got all kinds of products for every kind of hair. From brands like Amika, Kerastase, Day, and K18. You knew where to get great audio. Now, you know where to get great hair care, too. Sephora. Good news for great hair. Shop hair care now at Sephora.com.
I was deep in it, gaming on Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. Unfolding the screen made it twice as big and so immersive, I kinda lost myself. Might have trolled a little too close to the sun. Someone in the chat told me to touch grass, so I took my Z Fold 7 outside and kept playing. Still won, got a tan, and a nice little reset. Powerful processor, realistic graphics, you stay locked in, streak stays alive. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
The Judge Janine Pirro, Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday Morning Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, everybody. So let's bring in our first VIP guest. That, of course, she is, Carol Roth, my favorite guest ever. Every time I fill in for anybody, in this case, Judge Janine, Carol's my first phone call. So here she is once again. Carol, I've buttered you up quite good. You better be good because there's a lot of hype behind this interview right now.
Well, I hope that my check clears for the great promotion, Joe.
Venmo, actually. We do Venmo. So this way it stays under the radar. But so I want to talk to you about the economy. I see poll after poll showing that many Americans are not happy with Donald Trump's performance on the economy, particularly inflation. Then I see inflation's below 3%. I'm old enough to remember that Joe Biden, when he was in office, where inflation was above 9%. So why is there still these relatively poor numbers for the president when it appears that the economy is doing quite well when you consider the S&P, Dow Jones setting records now at this point? What's going on?
Yeah, well, I think that we have a bifurcation in the economy. There are people who are asset holders, like you mentioned, the stock market continues to hit new highs, people who have homes where the prices are continuing to go up, and those asset holders have benefited from the asset inflation. For people who are just trying to get by, pay rent, they don't have the assets, they're trying to buy groceries, you still have the latent effects of the Biden era inflation because wages have not caught up with the inflation for the cost of living. So if you are trying to buy a house and you don't already have one, if you're trying to invest in the stock market and you see that it continues to be expensive and at all-time highs, and maybe you don't even have any extra cash because you're using it all at the grocery store, these are the latent effects of what happened over the last 4 years. And even though the rate of inflation has slowed, it's still an increase in prices. I think a lot of people, when they hear, slowing inflation, they think about disinflation, the price going down, and that almost never happens. It just means that the price of going up slows down, and then hopefully over time your wages catch up. So I do think there is this growing divide, not based on merit, but based on Fed policy and government policy, and that's creating a lot of frustration, and that's what you're seeing in the numbers.
And you're right about that, Carol, and we're talking to Carol Roth. Of course, she is the two-time New York Times bestselling author of You Will Own Nothing. That is out. Well, it's been out for about 2 years now that I think about it, but it's still selling quite well. But it was very, let's say, Nostradamus-like in terms of what's happening right now. You mentioned before, Carol, as far as like people unable to buy homes. I'm one of those people where I have a home right now. It was the starter home. That was the plan 13 years ago. And then the kids keep getting bigger and the house keeps feeling smaller. And now we want to move within our own community, but the prices are through the roof, yet, mortgage rates are still what they are. Is that going to change anytime soon? And Jerome Powell, I guess the question I have for you is he doing a good job as far as handling the Federal Reserve? Because it seems like he's always a day late and a dollar short.
Wow, that's a lot of questions.
Yeah,
so I'll try to break them down into pieces to be digestible. So it is a really big challenge with housing because I would assume that you probably locked in a lower mortgage rate when we had that period of very low interest rates. Yeah, almost 15 years. So, not only do you not want to give that up, but if you were to give that up, like you said, then the house that you would try to buy is also at a higher price. So it's sort of a double whammy, if you would. Most of the time in the past, you would have one or the other. You would have interest rates would be high, but the houses would be reasonable, or vice versa. And now you have a bit of both. So, when does that change? I think that there are several catalysts. One, it depends on where you live. There are certainly areas like in Florida and Texas that were overbought with things like Airbnbs and people who are trying to make a profit, where you're starting to see a little bit more supply come into the market. I think that over time, the boomers who have a lot of the houses will eventually, make different choices. And hopefully, we'll have some deregulation that would help that as well. But it is going to continue to be a problem, I think, for many Americans for quite some time. As we get to Powell and the Fed, does the Fed do a good job? Well, it depends on what you think the Fed's objective is. If you think it is what it really is, which is to help the people in their club with the, at the expense of every other American, they've been doing a bang-up job. If it's to do their supposed dual mandate of stable prices, we know that was, they didn't do a very good job with that. And keeping employment on track, you could say, well, we have a lot of people who still aren't in the workforce. So I think that is going to be a challenge. And I have a recent article that's out that a lot of the good economic data that we started off talking about, things like, an increase in retail sales, as well as, not really the economy, but kind of market data, hitting all-time highs, makes it harder for Jay Powell to decrease interest rates, because it's saying, the higher interest rates aren't technically holding back the economy. But the other piece of that, Joe, is you have to remember that while the Fed can control short-term interest rates, things like mortgages, things like what we're paying on our government debt are actually controlled by the market. So I do think there are interventions that can happen. It's not going to be just from the Fed lowering interest rates, but all of those have consequences. And the biggest consequence of doing something, to change the tenor of what's happening with rates is inflation. And then we're going to go back to the problem we talked about before, which is that the cost of living for everyday Americans is going to continue to go up, and they're going to continue to be upset. And even if the house costs a little bit less, they may not have extra cash to invest because they're spending it all on their cost of living.
So if we had a President Carol Roth, would you replace Jerome Powell with, say, a Scott Bessent? Or who would your choice be as far as, if Powell's gone, then who would you put in there? And why?
So I would say if we're going with real choices, I'd say somebody like Judy Shelton, who is a fan of hard money and wants to bring back, hard assets like gold to back our currency. I think that would be a great choice. But really, the problem isn't the Fed chair; it's the institution. The institution has powers that it should not have, and we should be letting the market decide. That being said, we're in a really rough fiscal situation, and so doing that, would take some time. And the worst case scenario is if you, quote unquote, ended the Fed, and then their powers became usurped by Congress, and now all of a sudden you have the AOCs of the world setting monetary policy. So I think you have to be very careful what you wish for and really think through the problems and be very specific about the solutions, because change does not necessarily mean better.
Interesting. And then finally, Carol, we only have about a minute. So, Carol, we're now 6 months and about 6 days into Donald Trump's second term. What grade would you give him right now on the economy, on immigration, the border, and on foreign policy, in that order?
So I'm going to actually go out of order because I don't follow instructions, Joe. So I'm going to say the immigration and foreign policy is definitely Donald Trump's greatest strength. I give him, an A minus to an A on immigration. I'd like to see more deporting, but I think that, he's faced a lot of barriers and he's done a great job. And shout out to Tom Homan on that. Same thing on foreign policy. He's been really strong. It was a really strong place for his first go-around, and I think he's done a lot to de-escalate tensions and try to create a more peaceful situation in the world. A lot of work to be done, but I think he's done a really great job there. The economy, I think that I'm going to give him a C plus B minus because of the tariff insanity, which I think has been a distraction, has been a big tax for small businesses and consumers and will continue to be so, and is distracting from some of the other things like tax policy, which finally got done, and deregulation that I think will boost the economy. So that's where I'd like to see things settle down and change and move away from this, day-to-day, we're on again, we're off again, like Ross and Rachel with the tariffs, and, really put in place, policies that are going to, supercharge growth and remove barriers for the backbone of this economy.
Interesting. And 15 seconds, I guess. So when you see trade deals with countries like Japan, does that then change your perspective on tariffs as far as Trump's go about on this? Because it seems like he's getting more deals now.
But the deals all require the United States to pay more, whether it's consumers or businesses. So any deals that don't eliminate tariffs and make it free on both sides, I don't think are a victory. I think there's a lot more to be done there.
She is Carol Roth. She is the author of You Will Own Nothing. I'm learning that quickly now. It feels like I don't really own a lot outside of this house I can't move out of. Carol, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Always a pleasure.
Indeed. And this is the Judge Jeanine Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday show. Back with more in just a moment.
The Judge Jeanine Pirro Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.